let's talk about poverty. Have you ever stumbled on a homeless woman sitting by the roadside with her kids, begging for alms, and you're wondering, why do people live like this? What is the reason why someone with 2 hands and 2 legs, looking healthy, cannot possibly get up and fend for themselves? Have you ever come across an able-bodied man asking you for transport fare or just any small amount to buy something to eat just to stay alive? And you're wondering, why are you poor? Now, let me tell you a story. The year was 2019. I had just won my 3-month-long court battle with the EFCC. News of the court judgment quickly gave rise to rumors of an awarded sum. The town soon became unsafe for my family, so I took the bold decision to leave. We had some savings, but starting a new life in a new city you're unfamiliar with can be quite challenging, especially when you have a young family to cater to. I did it anyway. A few months after this decision, and with no income flowing in as before, I saw my life taking a downward turn. My business was losing money as I was no longer there to monitor the daily operations. I had failed to put structures in place to make it survive without me. So I had to make another tough decision: close down the business. In 6 months, I had taken 2 drastic decisions without much thought to what the results would be, and then it happened. Our savings quickly got exhausted. In the heat of the moment, I turned my attention to my properties, which were quite some investments we made for the future. But the human instinct for survival overpowered my will to hold on to the properties. The worst part was not that I was selling valuable assets. The money generated from these sales were being consumed and not invested in anything worthwhile. That was until 2 years after my relocation, when I was introduced to an investment that had slowly become the talk of the town. The offer of making a 15% return on investment every month with a promise to return my capital after 1 year was just too good to turn down. But where was I going to get this money to invest in this? At this point, we had just 1 property left. Despite all the counsel against selling, I thought I was making a very wise financial decision when I sold it and invested the money into that company. 4 months later, however, I would realize how wrong I was. As it turned out, the company was running a Ponzi scheme and not any legitimate investment. My money and all those who had invested in it was gone. I was back to ground zero. This time though, there was nothing left to sell, save for my car. As usual, that was sold within a week of this news. And then my camera followed. So did my laptop. One after the other, I kept selling my gadgets I had spent a fortune buying. Now, if you're wondering, but what did you do with all these monies raised from the sales? My answer to you will be, I tried to survive. You see, for every item I sold, there was a need waiting to take the money before I was even paid. Money was going into paying rent, buying food, paying for transportation, and sometimes learning a new skill. But with limited assets to sell, I again became stranded months down the line. With no way to raise funds for rent and my new skill not paying yet, I was faced with the reality of being homeless with 2 little girls. Our food was also running out. My thought at this point was, where do I turn to for help? The nights were now endlessly long and the days shorter than they used to be. But how did this happen? I prayed to God to help me. I was overwhelmed. I reached out to some people I thought could help. People I had served, worked with, and thought would be there for me in moments like this. All I got were promises, and sometimes blame for my wrong and terrible decisions. Well, a few friends who couldn't stomach what was happening to me rallied around to help me get accommodation, and one got me a side hustle that could give my family a daily meal while I continued to work on developing my new skill. I fought hard to stay sane and not lose belief in myself. It was the most difficult moment of my entire life, yet some of it, if not all, was the result of my decisions. But then, let's pause here for a second. How about Musa, a 22-year-old born in the northern state of Sokoto to a single mother? He had no access to education. From the age of 4, he was already begging strangers on the street. Growing up, there were days when he had nothing to eat. The money raised from begging was used to treat his baby sister, who would later die from malnutrition. His village had no electricity, no clean drinking water. Internet access is a myth to him and his people. And for 22 years, he had lived like this. He has no idea of how to produce anything of value. His only knowledge of work is begging, and he does this to survive, to feed, to stay alive. To Musa and his friends, shelter is a luxury. Anywhere the night meets them, they sleep. Coming across Musa on the street without knowing his story, you might be tempted to ask, why are you poor? This is where I tell you that poverty is never simply explained. Some are born into it, some fell into it, and for some, in most cases, they are trapped in it as a result of the place they find themselves. Nigeria, for example now. Every person's experience is unique to them. Yet, thinking about it, our realities sometimes are the same. Let me show you what I mean. Now, imagine if you find yourself in a difficult position. You have a family to feed, yet you don't know where your next meal is coming from. You're about to be thrown out of your house because you are late on rent payments. Then out of the blue, someone approaches you. Let's say a politician or a popular rich man, promising to solve your immediate problems. His only ask is that you do something that you ordinarily wouldn't do. Or consider the situation of Musa, a young man whose only knowledge of how to make money is to beg. Imagine he is approached by a politician driving in a convoy of over 20 cars to his remote village. He had never seen some of these cars in his entire life, and now this politician is addressing him and his friends, promising them a better life if they agree to do every one of his bidding. What do you think the response to this request will be? Are there requests or commands? You see, poverty renders people powerless and voiceless. Nobody hears the poor. Being poor forces you to accept rudeness and humiliation when you seek help. But you know what else poverty does? It makes one vulnerable to manipulation. This is why a corrupt society driven by greed and ruled by people who only think of self-enrichment can only breed poverty. When you think about why so many people live in poverty in a society blessed with arable lands and mineral resources, you realize that it is because so many rich people benefit from it. Northern Nigeria is blessed with arable lands that can feed the entire nation. Former President Buhari once lamented that Nigeria is only able to cultivate 2.5% of its arable lands. This leaves about 80% of arable land uncultivated in the north alone. But northern elites would rather accumulate wealth for themselves and their family than invest in the region. The result is an insane level of poverty rate, with the World Bank stating that 87% of poor Nigerians live in the north. The poorest region of the nation, which is the Northwest Zone, has a population of 35.7 million people. That is about the same population as the Southeast and South-South combined. The three northern zones have a much larger proportion of Nigeria's human capital, land mass, and agricultural assets, and they have a lot of solid minerals yet to be exploited. If Nigeria were to do away with the current system that breeds poverty and invest in the vast agricultural lands located here, as well as harness the mineral resources of the region, northern Nigeria can feed the whole of the West African sub-region. And with oil revenue dwindling, such a venture can easily earn 20 times what the nation earns currently from oil and gas. So I ask, how can a region with so much potential for greatness also be known as the poorest region of the country? Every year, northern Nigeria continues to grow in population and insecurity, yet cannot produce half of what it consumes. Normally, a region with such a young and large population should represent a large market as well. But it does not, because it has no purchasing power. It has little to zero economic growth as its economy remains substantially peasant. The little infrastructure it has is in decay. When you look at the young population most times, it's a bunch of poor roadside beggars with no hope of quality education or opportunities to acquire skills. There's little to no industrial base, no skilled labor, and no capital to invest in developing agricultural technology. So again, how can a region with the majority of the voting population have such terrible political fortunes? How can the region with some of the richest men in all of Africa have the lowest success rates in qualifying examinations for post-secondary institutions and the highest percentage of unqualified teachers in its primary and secondary schools? While the vast majority of the citizens lack access to functional rural health centers, the leaders occasionally jump on planes and go on medical tourism whenever they feel like it. And then, when these poor people lament, the government gives them palliatives conveniently. Keep them poor, then watch as they feed on the crumbs that fall from the tables of the rich. But then you ask, how does poverty benefit the elite? How has it become a thriving business? The rich and powerful have created a lot more poor people in Nigeria, mainly for selfish and political reasons. Northern leaders have managed to keep the northern masses in perpetual ignorance and human misery, that the masses no longer bother to think for themselves. Their size and larger number of local governments entitle them to higher revenue. But why is the region in such a mess? When it comes to elections, northern elites allegedly influence the decision of whom their people should vote for. They manipulate them into selling their votes and sometimes make elections out to be an us versus them situation, leading to the recycled garbage we have leading the nation today. But this thriving business of poverty that may sometimes appear like a northern affair is not without consequences for the entire country. You see, when people are excluded within a society, when they are not well educated, and when they have a higher incidence of illness, there are negative consequences for such a society. At the end of the day, we all get to pay the price for poverty. And like a wise man once said, one day, the poor will have nothing to eat but the rich. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.